Hey everybody out there, this is Seto, and today for you guys we are going to be talking about a very interesting little topic. So we're going to talk some more about some Yu-Gi-Oh history, I guess you could say, and just talk about some interesting little things. Now, I got the idea for this topic talking about staple or staple deck and how the word has changed from what it meant in 2003, 2004, and 2005 to what staple and staple deck means kind of to some extent, mind you, to some extent in 2000 and I guess you could say 15. And the reason I got this idea, if you didn't watch one of my other videos I was doing earlier this week about archetypes and how they've been around for a lot longer and how they may have saved the game of Yu-Gi-Oh to some extent, which was a very fun video to do, by the way. Took a good walk down memory lane, but the reason I got an idea for this is because I was reading all these profiles and deck profiles and people talking about side decking and main decking and how to build a good core deck from like 04 and whatnot, and I kind of noticed something in how the word staple deck changed between what it means now and what it meant back then. Back then, most all decks, with the exception of maybe Exodia and some other decks here and there, please excuse me, my allergies are acting up, but beside the point, most decks back then all had a certain list of cards that they considered staple deck worthy. That all decks played these cards because they are just good cards. So let me give you some examples. These are very well known cards. Pot of Greed, it's a good solid +1. Harpy's Feather Duster. Change of Heart, very good card. You can beat down your opponent. Snatch and Steal, you could use this as tribute fodder. Things of this nature. Graceful Charity helps draw your deck. Even Painful Choice was considered somewhat main deck worthy in a lot of decks, even Chaos decks, because first off, it could set up your graveyard, second off, it could thin your deck out, kind of. So a lot of these cards back then were considered staple deck worthy. Even to some extent, Ring of Destruction was considered a staple deck trap card because it was just too dang good. As well as Breaker the Magical Warrior, something you wouldn't consider a staple deck card even in 2004 maybe even, was actually in today's game back then was considered so powerful because it was a back row remover, and plus on top of that it could be a beater to some extent, so it had a dual purpose and was considered for most decks main deck worthy in a staple deck. But flash forward to 2015 and what we consider a staple deck or staple in today's game. When we talk about staples in today's game, it's not the same as they talked about back then. Back then, like I said, there was a list of cards that every deck played for the most part because they were considered very powerful cards, like Forceful Sentry and things like that as well, and Premature Burial, and Monster Reborn, and the list goes on of just cards, because as I was looking through these decks back then, just about every deck ran, for the most part, the same exact staple cards, and that's how the word staple deck started, because they were so good you ran them in every single deck, Delinquent Duo and so forth and so on. Flash forward to 2015. The word staple has kind of turned to a new terminology to some extent, like I said before. Nowadays, we don't have these powerful cards that are generic to some extent. We do have our Regekis, our Rotas, or things like that, but we don't have our generic draw cards. We don't have our generic destruction cards except Regeki and Dark Hole. We don't have just these generically good cards and generically good monsters that every deck should run just because they're good. Now we have a more archetype-based game where we consider this card staple in this archetype, this card staple in this archetype, and even staple deck cards that were considered staple back in the day are even up for debate by many people, or some people I guess you could say, of their staple deck-ness. Things like Regeki, Dark Hole, MST even in this format. They're cards that, you know, depending upon the format, they're considered staple, but they're not staple every single format, not all the time. And staple has taken on a new terminology because you can look at an archetype and you can say, okay, for 6 Samurai, I play my 3 Kagemusha, my 3 Kizan, my 2 Shein in the extra deck, my 3 United We Stand, and these are my staple cards that I run 3 of because they're that powerful. Or Gateway if it was back. I consider that card powerful, I run that one card. It's not so much generic-esque cards that are considered staple anymore. It's archetype-based cards that are considered staple more of, or less. Now, is this always true? No. It usually depends upon the format, I find. And the trap lineup. I mean, for me personally, my trap lineup may change here or there, but there are some staple-esque cards. Bottomless, Compulse, things of that nature. Fiendish Chain pretty much is almost in every single one of my decks. And I apologize for the sun going down as well. But I feel to some extent that the way I've been reading and talking and looking at what people back in the day considered staple, the way they used it and the way they phrase it is a lot different than what we use it nowadays. Because every time I look at a deck profile or watch a deck profile, we usually say this card's a staple because, you know, it's, you know, helps the archetype out. We don't just say this generic card I splash in all these different decks is staple because it's that good of a card. There's really not a monster out there like that. Maybe if Sangan or Wish of the Black Forest came back, that would happen, but there's not a monster like that. There's not a spell like that to some extent. Yes, Soul Charge maybe could be an example. Yes, Book of Moon maybe. Yes, Regeki. But you look at what all the decks do nowadays, and the card and archetype pool is so variant that not all those cards are good in all those certain decks. They're not considered staple. You don't hear everybody saying you have to run this card in every single deck nowadays. I feel that to some extent it's changed. Some people may disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine, but I just find through reading these old school articles and listening to deck profiles nowadays and talking to people when we talk about staples, the word terminology from what I considered staple back in the day, because I actually played back then, and nowadays is very different. So that's just my thought. And if you're an old school player, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. On what do you personally feel like the word staple has changed throughout the course of Yu-Gi-Oh history? And that's just a little bit of your Yu-Gi-Oh history, I guess, for you guys on the word staple and how it's kind of changed throughout Yu-Gi-Oh history. And I would love to hear from some old players that played even in 2005, you know, the old days. Do they feel like the word staple deck has changed? So I hope this video was a little interesting, gave you a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh history, and I feel that we have to learn some Yu-Gi-Oh history because it's very interesting, Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and it's something that I've really liked studying about the past metas and past history because it teaches you what, I guess you could say at the end of the day, you know, how far we've come, how much has changed in 10 years in Yu-Gi-Oh, and you know, how different it's become, how much more fast-paced, and how many broken cards we've had, and you know, a lot of these staple-esque cards that I've been talking about from back in the day are now currently residing on the banned list. Yes, Pot of Greed, Graceful Charity, Painful Choice, Forceful Sentry. I mean, just recently, I mean, Ring of Destruction got the errata. So I'm trying to say is a lot of these staple cards from back in the day are starting to make their way back, but there's still a lot of them on the ban list from back then. And I think the terminology has changed. But that's the end of the video, guys. Hope you guys like that. Can't wait to hear your comments down in the comments section. I always love reading the comments, even though sometimes I don't respond back because I always look at them when they come up on my screen, though. But till next time, guys, take care. Have fun dueling. Good luck dueling. Hope this video was interesting. Until next time, guys, take care, everybody, and good luck dueling to everybody. Seto Kaiba, I'm out of here, guys. Till next time. Good luck dueling to all of you. Take care, everybody.